That's how I see life with my kids, with my spouse, with my community, with my business partners, is I want to go have 50-year relationships. I want to go have 100-year relationships. I want, for as long as I'm on the planet, I want to kind of be able to go do deals and spend time with the same people. And you just treat people and you act differently if that's your mentality. All right, guys, welcome back to Case Studies. It is early January 2025 as I'm recording this, and I kind of have that energy or that spirit of good habits, going back to the basics, and kind of implementation of trying to live an excellent life and trying to go put the fundamentals of the basics that kind of are the inputs that get those outputs. And so a couple of those habits that I wanted to share are, one of them was a habit that I adopted. It was probably a decade ago or maybe even 15 years ago. And I did it for a long time. And the last couple of years, I haven't done it, which was this habit of reading a book a week, or listening to an audiobook a week. I like to listen instead of read because I can do it in my car. I can do it at the gym. I can do it in some of those dead times. And so I implemented that habit. I've got 3 books down in the first couple of weeks, and I'm really excited about it. But to add on that, instead of finding all new books to read, I went back and I put a list together of some of the favorite books that I've ever read in my entire life and put them on that list to go re-listen to them. And so far it's just been fantastic. I've really liked it. I want to talk about the second habit. And this one's completely unique and different. This is from Jocko Willink. And he introduced this habit of 10 minutes of burpees. And it's exactly what I don't want to do every morning. And you either do 100 burpees or 10 minutes, whichever one comes sooner. I've done this the last 7 days. I've already seen phenomenal results, mostly mental, from having something that I don't want to do, doing it and feeling really proud that I did it. And it just takes 10 minutes. A modification on this, Chelsea, my wife, has implemented the same habit, but she said sometimes I don't have 10 minutes. And so on the days that I am too busy, I always have 5 minutes. So on kind of a day where I just have to do something, I'll do it for 5 minutes. And on most days, I'll do it 10 minutes. And both of us have done it, got really good results. So I'll kind of keep you in the loop on my burpees habit, but I am so far so good doing it every day. So the book that I want to, the challenge that I have for everybody isn't to go read a book a week. You can if you'd like to. But I want to do a book a month challenge. And so to hold myself accountable and also to go document and retain some of the learnings that I'm getting from these books, I'm going to do a solo cast once a month on my favorite book that I read the previous month. And I'm going to start today with a book called Am I Being Too Subtle by Sam Zell. So Sam Zell is a serial legendary entrepreneur. He's now passed away. Grew up in Chicago, the son of Jewish parents that just escaped the Holocaust. Literally were on the last train out of Poland before the Germans bombed the rail lines, and it took them 2 years to get to the U.S. And so his dad was a really successful entrepreneur in Poland and literally showed up to the U.S. without speaking the language, without any actionable networks, and had to go make a life for himself. And so he came from that upbringing and that foundation. Sam was always a rebel. He always saw outside of the box. His first business venture, he went into the city and there was a Playboy magazine and he really liked it. And then he realized other people might like it too. And so he would buy these magazines and take it into the suburbs and show them to his friends and charge his friends for the magazines. And that was like his first entrepreneurial venture of finding a need and then finding a market for that need. But he's a really amazing guy, big-hearted guy, and he had insane success. But what resonated with me so much about Sam Zell is he did it his way, in an authentic way, the entire time. Never wore a suit, kind of just showed up the way that he showed up. He was a Harley Davidson rider. The first time that he met Steve Schwartzman had just started his firm Blackstone. And I think it was Sam's sister had recommended that he meet Sam, and Sam came up and he thought that Sam was lost. He literally had his biker gear, and he had chained his bike up outside of Steve Schwartzman's office in New York. And they met each other, and Sam said, hey, we do a lot of real estate and looking to get into business, and I hear that you're really good at buying businesses. And, from that day, Sam did a lot of work with Blackstone, and they, helped him buy a bunch of businesses. And ultimately, they executed on the biggest real estate transaction that had ever been done up until that point. He sold equity office to Blackstone in 2007. I think it was a $45 billion transaction. And it goes back to his 5 points, 5 principles that he kind of lived by, that I want to go through those 5 principles that were kind of end up being foundational for his entrepreneurial career and the way he thought about things. So the first principle was be contrarian and be opportunistic. He just always felt like he didn't want to go do it the traditional way. Even when he was going to school, at that time in life, there was so much entrepreneurship didn't really exist, like this category. It wasn't taught in schools, and was probably looked down upon. The more traditional roles were definitely more respected, and especially in that Jewish community where you were just expected to go get as much education as you could get. And so ultimately he ended up getting his law degree. But on the way, he ended up buying some student housing in the neighborhood that he was in. And that's where he kicked off his career, was buying a home, and then ended up buying a number of homes and putting a whole block together and building and managing student housing, and just got phenomenal returns. And so he was making incredible money by the time he started showing up to interview for these law firms. And he was surprised he just didn't get any offers for any of these firms. And ultimately, one of the firms sat down with him and said, what are you doing here? Like, you're not going to last here 3 months. And he just said, what are you talking about? They're like, you're too independent for this role. Like, this is a role that like needs to take orders and like needs to go grind and work for a salary. And you're making more than most of the partners. So ultimately they worked out an agreement where he could work in there, and any of the new contracts or business that he brought in, he would just take a percentage of the upside. So it was kind of a commission-based structure, which seems so common sense now, but it was really radical back then. And it ultimately ended up breaking down because he was making so much money bringing new business into the firm that other partners just didn't like it. And so ended up kind of continuing to try to reduce his percentage until ultimately he ended up transitioning out. But that principle of be contrarian, be opportunistic, one of the platforms that he built that ended up being a massive part of his real estate empire. In the 1970s, there was a banking crisis. And there was, people were fleeing the downtown urban areas, especially with real estate. Prices were really low. And he had this contrarian view that urban areas would get redeveloped and that real estate would end up being worth a lot. And so he went and, bought up a lot of the real estate in Chicago and Detroit and some of these markets, that were really depressed, and ultimately, was proved right, having that real estate kind of close to the downtown, these hubs of these cities, end up being a great outcome for him long term. Number 2, focus on downside, not just upside. He always focused on the downside and losing money. He did a deal early on in his career where he lost money, and realized that the upside, it's always easy to see the upside in the deal. And you can't just focus on downside. Like, you have to be an optimist and you have to be a deal person. You've got to be a creative person trying to go put something together. But his admonition is to focus more on the downside and how you can lose money as you also couple that with what is the upside opportunity. But managing risk is what he felt like he was the best, what he was the best at. It wasn't taking risk, it was managing risk, and figuring out how to reduce that risk as low as he possibly could and get the most amount of upside that he possibly could. Number 3, relationships matter. His original college roommate was a guy named Bob Leary. And they went out and they had their success building these, apartment complexes. But then they kind of moved on to go get their real job. They didn't have anybody coaching them and telling them, hey, you have something really great here, keep doing it. So even while they were doing that side hustle, they always kind of were walking on the original plan. And Bob went and got his job, and then Sam went and worked for the attorney and then split off and started doing his thing. And ultimately went back to Bob and said, hey, when you're ready to go make some real money, let's partner up. And it took Bob a couple of years to realize, hey, I don't want to work in corporate America. And so Sam had a lot of momentum. He'd build his business, but he valued Bob so much that they ultimately put a plan together where they could end up being 50-50 partners. And they put a structure together they felt was fair. And him and Bob, they end up going and building this business for over 40 years until Bob passed away from cancer. But just through his career, so many of his relationships, whether it was the Pritzker family in Chicago, or whether it was Steve Schwartzman in Blackstone, he said that he had a particular issue where he got caught in a market cycle. There was a bank that was being really tough on him, and he needed $50 million to kind of take out this note. And he ultimately ended up calling, I can't remember his name, Mr. Pritzker, the head of this family, told him the situation. And the guy said, we'll wire the money, and sent a $50 million wire. And they, ultimately end up getting them a return on their money. But he just said, I never would have had the relationship or the credibility or the ability to go make that call if I wouldn't have made those deposits and had that long-term horizon or that long-term real estate. He did a deal with Blackstone, the biggest real estate deal ever done. But he'd known Steve Schwartzman for over 20 years and had done a lot of deals with Steve Schwartzman over those years. And so ultimately, when he decided to go sell this portfolio, the market was still ripping. The market was still extremely hot. And he went through this process of selling with Blackstone. And ultimately, they had a good enough relationship that they structured a deal where even for Blackstone bought that deal for $44 billion. They bought it at the top of the market. But because of how they structured it, Blackstone was able to sell assets simultaneous to close. And they were able to sell off over half of the portfolio at a significant increase from what they were buying it for, and reduce their exposure. And it ended up being a good outcome for Blackstone as well. And so we just had kind of this win-win, long-term, do deals with people for a long time mentality that it's resonated with me. That's how I see life. That's how I see life with my kids, with my spouse, with my community, with my business partners. Is I want to go have 50-year relationships. I want to go have 100-year relationships. I want, for as long as I'm on the planet, I want to kind of be able to go do deals and spend time with the same people. And you just treat people and you act differently if that's your mentality. Number 4 is keep it simple. He had this mindset on deals that they get overly complicated, and the core fundamentals of the deals usually come down to one or two things. He talked about focus on just straightforward metrics, cash flow, net margins, and not doing deals that are overly complicated or overly dependent on financing structures or schemes for it to work. And so, that was his philosophy, and he made a lot of money just keeping his investment thesis really simple. And that's how he's able to navigate through a lot of different things, through real estate and through leverage buyouts of businesses they had so much success in business, but they ultimately realized we have a business and a deal-making skill set. It's not just a real estate skill set. And so they ended up going and building a number of these other companies, and buying and growing these other companies through the similar principles they used with real estate, through leverage buyouts, through taking advantage of net losses on companies' balance sheets. There was a bunch of these companies that had these massive net losses that were kind of carrying forward, where ultimately like you could make a deal work just from the tax savings, and coupling these two together. And so he was just really creative in his deal structure. Lastly, number 5, stay curious and stay agile. Sam built one of the biggest manufactured housing companies, the biggest manufactured housing company in the world, a company called ELS, Equity Lifestyle. But it came from this contrarian view. Manufactured housing or mobile home parks were completely out of favor. They were unattractive. And he had somebody present an offer to him on a mobile home park. And when he went and checked it out, the real estate was fantastic. The real estate was phenomenal. But because it was manufactured housing community, the price was really low. And they went and did the deal, and it worked out really well. And it kind of this light went off where he said, how much of this exists in the country? And the answer was, it was a lot. And so just by him staying curious and being open to new opportunities and kind of even acting as a child and just kind of listening, he was able to get turned on to a multi-billion-dollar platform or opportunity. A couple of the principles that he operated on that I thought were fantastic. It was supply and demand, and liquidity equals value. He would always focus on, with his investments, how to always get or have liquidity. So he was kind of one of the pioneers of the public REIT model, took a lot of his companies public, but his whole focus was how do you create liquidity within your investments. And his view was that if you're liquid, that equals value creation. If you're illiquid, you can't claim the value within those investments, which has been super helpful for me to have that mindset. Success for Sam was being bold. It was valuing people. It was having long-term relationships. It was working hard. And so anyway, I couldn't recommend this book higher. I loved it. I loved every aspect of it. And the reason I love biographies, it's talking about these independent, unique journeys of people and what they did, not what they said or not in theory what they would go do, but what they did and how it worked out. And I just think there's so much wisdom to be gleaned from people who've traveled the path before us. And so love this book, and love the new year for that excuse to start new habits, have a positive perspective or an optimistic perception of the future, and then implement kind of some new practices or rituals that'll go bring us more success and happiness and joy and fulfillment in 2025. So thank you guys.